Hello, and welcome to the second lesson from Living World. This is about food chains and food webs. And what we're trying to do here is to understand how energy is transferred from the sun to all living parts of an ecosystem. All life on Earth depends on photosynthesis. If it wasn't for the sun, not only would it be very dark and very cold, but we wouldn't have any food. And the reason for this is, as you can see from the diagram, is that food is generated initially on Earth via plants, and plants use photosynthesis, getting their energy from the sun. They also need carbon dioxide and water from the soil. And those three things create plant life, which is then the beginning of all food chains which are on Earth. Okay, so these are vital ingredients for all of us, not just the sun's energy, but also carbon dioxide, which the plants need, and also good quality, healthy soil. So when we look at this, we can see how all living beings on Earth get their energy. So you've got the producer on the left-hand side, which will be a green plant of some sort. And that can vary from obviously grass to trees. Out in the oceans, it's actually something called phytoplankton, which are able to take the sun's energy and turn it into food. Now, along comes a primary consumer, and of course, in this case, it's just a snail, and that will get its energy by eating the plants. And if you've got snails in your garden, you'll understand exactly what we mean. There's enough of them, and they can certainly eat a lot. But the snail is at risk because of secondary consumers may well come along and eat the snail. Okay, in this case, it's pictured as a frog, but quite likely to be birds and things like that. And then effectively that secondary consumer is consumed as what we'd call a carnivore, whereas the primary consumer would be what we call a herbivore, or you might even say vegetarian. And then finally, in this diagram, the small carnivore here, which is a frog, may then become food for a larger carnivore, probably most likely to be a mammal. In this case, it's a fox. Okay, and that would be a tertiary consumer. And one thing to try and remember is that actually food chains don't tend to be very long. And one of the reasons for this is the bit at the bottom where it says 90% of energy is lost. And what we mean by this is, look at the snail. It will only eat a very small part of the plant. So it will only get a certain amount of goodness from the energy that's available. Then the frog comes along, and of course, the snail will have used quite a lot of that energy that it's gained from the plants just moving around. Might not move very quickly, might not move very far, but it will have used energy and just staying alive. So even if the frog ate the whole of the snail, which it's unlikely to do, it wouldn't get the benefit that the snail got from the plants because the snail's used up some of that energy just moving around. Equally with the fox may well eat the whole of a frog, but of course, in the meantime, after eating the snail, the frog probably has been bouncing around a lot, jumping up and down, using lots of energy, breathing, all those sorts of things, and that means that quite a lot of the energy that it got from eating the snail is not then transferred to the fox. So we call this type of diagram a food chain. Okay, they are varying length. Okay, all food chains on land begin with plants. Okay, plants are then eaten by small organisms, and they in turn are eaten by large organisms. Okay, in many ways, the one at the bottom is most realistic in the sense that the role of very small insects is often how these food chains start. Okay, maybe the top one's a possible one that we might see in Norfolk. Okay, with the rodents eating the corn or the crops in the fields, and there's plenty of owls in Norfolk, and they'll come along and they search for mice and rats and things like that for food. Okay, notice it's a very short food chain. The one at the bottom we won't see in the UK, simply because we haven't got any pythons. but that's a sort of very long food chain, and you wouldn't expect one to be any longer than that. Okay, so as I explained, only 10% of the energy produced by a plant is transferred to their consumers, because the fox will not eat all of the rabbit. The rabbit will also use up energy running around and keeping warm. So only a small amount of what is gained from the carrot will actually be available to the fox. So have a go at this. Use all the words and phrases below to make a table as shown on the next slide. If you get stuck, look back at the example food chains. Okay. So I would start with the labels at the bottom. So you can see there it's got primary producer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, primary consumer. Put those labels in, and then if you can work out what goes where. As a hint, the bigger the animal, the more likely it is to be a tertiary consumer, or certainly a secondary consumer. Obviously, if it's a plant of any sort, it will be a primary producer. There you go. So some examples have been put in for you. So you've got the grass at the bottom, caterpillar, very small insect, so that would most likely to be a primary consumer. And then I'd say you've got your larger birds and mammals at the top. Okay. So some questions to think about. What's the difference between a producer and a consumer? What's the difference between a herbivore and a carnivore? And what is the difference between primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers? If you can learn those, the answer to those questions, you're going to do very well in terms of this topic. The other thing is the difference between a food chain and a food web. Okay, on the left-hand side there, you've got the food chain, and you'll notice it's just simply showing you one way in which energy is transferred through a particular ecosystem. When we talk about food webs, what we try to do is actually show all the different ways. So in this example, you've got the algae in the top left-hand corner. And algae, of course, isn't just eaten by one creature. In this case, it'll be in a pond. It could be eaten by prawns, carp, and slugs. So all three. Okay. Equally, if you look at the prawn, for example, a prawn won't just eat algae. It'll also eat other things. In this case, it would be waterweed. Okay. And then if you go over to the far right-hand side, you've got the kingfisher, which is likely to try and eat lots of different fish, although I must admit I've never seen a kingfisher eat a carp. I've seen them eat lots of small fish. Probably a little bit more realistic is the snake. Okay, so really the way to remember it is a food web is several food chains, all in one small ecosystem. Here we go. Food chain shows one example, and then a food web shows multiple food chains which all have relationships with each other. So here we go. Can you spot any that other than the ones that I've already talked about? So if we're talking about a food chain here, what you need to do is you just need to follow one along. So here's the algae here, and I'm going to follow this along here to the prawn, and then across to the trout, and then eventually over to the kingfisher. So that will be an example of a food chain. Let's do another one. So we've got the waterweed. Let's go down, shall we? Down to the pond fly. So there'll be lots of flies in and around ponds. That'll be thank you very much to the frog. I'll eat that. And then if this is not in the UK, but another a snake, it will come along and eat the frog. If this is the UK, that would probably be a bird of prey of some description. Okay, so I've just highlighted two food chains there within the food web.